My guest today relentlessly pursues individual sound. He knows the spirit inside him sings from an island shore in the middle of the world, a cotton field in New Madrid, Missouri, or at Small's Paradise in Harlem, where Jimmy Smith would groove that organ like a wailer. My guest today is a conductor of major symphony orchestras in the U.S. and Canada, so he has roots in the classical idiom. But when performing, he likes to swing the band like Tony Williams. Except unlike polyrhythms, my guest uses his voice polyphonically, performing the main melody and accompanying parts of the song. He blends this with the soul of Bill Withers, Save Me Jesus in Grandma's Hands with Gil Scott Heron and Leon Thomas. Every time my guest performs, he carries with him the burning spear of electricity, being able to project with confidence and clairvoyance, be it Henry Mancini's Pink Panther, or the PBS series This Is Your Brain on Music, or coming over the top of a Gil Goldstein accordion solo. My guest's individuality has led to 10 Grammy Awards, invitations to play all over the world, spreading his message of spirituality, not religiosity, and the co-joining of faith with the incandescent vocals, ad-libs, beats, cuicas, and spoken word that makes music the magic that it is. Bobby McFerrin, it's an honor to welcome you to the Jake Feinberg Show.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Tell me, Bobby, why did your family relocate to Southern California?
Well, in 1958, when my dad was just finishing up with the Metropolitan Opera, he got asked to be the voice of Sidney Poitier in the movie Porgy and Bess. So my parents came out, my mother was in the chorus. She was also in the film. And they left New York not thinking that they would move to California. They thought they would just go to Los Angeles for a few months to do the film and then return. But when they were out in California, they fell in love with it. And so I moved to Los Angeles in 1958 when I was 8 years old.
And you eventually made it up to, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the club scene in Sacramento. I've talked to a lot of the cats. He used to play at Dave's Soul Kitchen. It was a hotbed of music activity, and you went to Cal State Sacramento, and I was wondering...
I went to Cal State Sacramento. I didn't do much hanging out in the club when I lived there.
You weren't hanging out. All right.
I was actually I spent a lot of time hanging out just with the musicians in the music department because we used to call the music department the Zoo. For some reason, I don't know how it acquired that nickname, but it did. And so my first class would be a theory class, usually 10 o'clock in the morning, and I would be there for 12 hours. I would just hang out, whether I was in class or not, because there was always some musicians to talk to, hang out with, play with. So I didn't really make it out into the clubs in Sacramento. But when I left Sacramento and moved back to Los Angeles, then I was hanging out at Dante's, hanging out at Shelley's Manhole, and then cruising Sunset Boulevard and going to the clubs, listening to all kinds of music, rock, and I remember seeing Herbie Hancock at the Whiskey and Chicago, the band Chicago at the Whiskey, and so it was generally a pretty good time.
Well, I was going to say, could you point to any mentors in the Zoo that you had? I mean, you weren't out gigging, but you obviously those guys had an impact on you.
Yeah, they did. My theory teacher, Henry Harrison, was a huge mentor for me. He was a good buddy.
Why was he a mentor to you?
He was just a really, really good teacher. He made music fun. It was very, very interesting. I have to say, though, that probably the one singular person that kind of kept me going, I was a composition major in school. And at that point, when I was about 18, 19, 20, those ages, I dreamed of being a Hollywood film writer, film scorer, writing and arranging for not only films but for television shows, and arranging music for different groups, that were on the scene.
Sure.
And my main man at the time was Dave Grusin.
Oh, man. What a name to drop. So go ahead, continue.
Anyway, so Dave Grusin was my man. His name was on everything in the 60s, everything.
Yeah.
And I thought, I really would like to do what Dave is doing. And so I took a chance one day, and I found his name in the Musicians Union book. I called him up, and wife or assistant or secretary, somebody answered the phone and told me that he was working on a film called Tell 'Em Willie Boy is Here with Robert Redford at Paramount Studios. And, she said, I'll take a message, so leave your name and your number. And so I gave him, told him who I was. And then I thought, well, that was that because, he's this big and busy Hollywood composer, and he doesn't know who I am. I'm just a college student, 19 years old. 3 days later, he called me back.
Wow.
He actually called. He invited me to the scoring session that he was doing, and he said, bring your compositions, let me take a look at them. So I brought what I was working on. He looked them over. He took me to the scoring session. He introduced me to all the musicians who were working on the film. He showed me how, scoring for films worked. And he became sort of a mentor-teacher after that for me, and we're friends to this day. We did a gig last year in Florida, in Miami, just about a year and a couple of months ago.
That is so because you couldn't have asked to be at a better time with Motown coming from Detroit to Southern California. Then you had the Hollywood scene. Those I've interviewed all those cats: Emil Richards, Ernie Watt, all those. To me, could you paint the picture of what was going on? Were you in awe that day? Aside from him calling,
I was in awe because he took the time to give an old college student a try.
Mm-hmm.
Just to see what I was up to and stuff. He took some time to really listen to what I had to say, what I was saying musically. And I loved being a musician back in those days because if you remember the late '60s. Especially when the Beatles went over to India and brought the music of India back into their pieces, people really started exploring, cross-pollination musically, and so you had the rock musicians experimenting with working with symphony orchestras like the Moody Blues. You had Miles Davis coming along and combining improvisational jazz with funky beats. By hiring Michael Henderson to play electric bass. And I think he at one point played with James Brown. Is that right? Do you know?
You're talking about Henderson? Absolutely. No, listen, Bobby, for the record, I was born in 1978. So I'm going back for my daughters and future generations. And this cross-pollination that you talk about is just, I'm marinating in it because it spoke to the individual fearlessness of the leaders like Miles, guys that
right. Well, Miles, when I saw him play at Shelley's Manhole in February of 1971, was just a month shy of my 21st birthday. I saw Miles' band play at Shelley's Manhole. The band was Keith Jarrett, Jack DeJohnette, Gary Bartz on soprano sax, Airto, Michael Henderson on bass, and Miles. And Miles walked out in a black shirt, black leather pants, playing a black trumpet hooked up to a wah-wah pedal. He played a couple of notes, and play his phrases, and then he left the stage and let the band play for 15, 20 minutes and jam. I was sitting directly behind Keith Jarrett's piano, and I was just amazed at what he was doing, playing Fender Rhodes with his right hand and Vox organ with his left and playing these incredible unison lines and these incredible left-handed harmonies that nobody but him could have come up with. And I remember floating out of the club and thinking, I want to do that. I want to explore improvisation the way that Miles does, because I had heard of improv when I was a college student, but I was a composer and I wrote everything down, even the horn solos I wanted them to play. So I was very much into notation and having things go my way. And then when Miles introduced me to improvisation and just basically was telling me, let the music have its way. Let the music lead you into these places that you probably wouldn't have thought of on your own. That's when I understood what my mission was to improvise, would just take what was in my environment, my musical environment, and play with it, use it, play with it.
It's beautifully said. We're talking to Bobby McFerrin. Some of that sort of open heart that Grusin showed, calling you up, even having, and just the intimacy and the access to some of these incredible swing jazz players, and I look at you now, Bobby, when you play live, you're going to go into the crowd, you're going to pull people out, you're going to try to get them to work with what they have. So in those guys, you still carry that torch today. Well,
it's, for some reason, I've always had the idea that the audience had a color. The audience had a sound. And I want to find out what that sound is. I want to find out what that color is. And so I use the audience as part of my instrument. It's almost like the audience is my art. It's not so much about me being on stage alone and showing you my technique and what I can do vocally. I've always felt that I wanted to include everybody, like family and friends sitting around by a fireplace or something in someone's living room, and somebody pulls out a guitar and says, "Hey, you remember this song? You remember I wrote this when I was, downhearted because I moved to such and such a place and things didn't work out the way I thought, so I wrote this song." It's just a whole bunch of people getting together in my living room, sitting around the fireplace, just reminiscing, talking about music, playing samples of pieces that they've either written or pieces that they're working on. Because many times when I'm on stage, I might start a piece and decide, well, this isn't the piece I want to sing right now, so I'll just stop it midair. I wish I could do that with orchestras, but that wouldn't work.
You went through a period after you graduated in '72. You took a long time to marinate and really find your, pardon the pun, find your voice. I mean, you didn't listen to anybody. You were listening to improvisational music, and I'm just wondering, how did Bobby get comfortable performing live? I'd love you to take us through that.
Yeah, well, you're right. Around '71, when I was 21, when all of a sudden my musical future was shattered by what improvisation brought to me, and I seriously started thinking that perhaps I wasn't cut out to be a Hollywood composer. I just started listening to a lot of Keith Jarrett stuff, a lot of horn players, listening to people who were specializing in improv, John Coltrane,
Bartz,
Keith,
Gary Bartz,
Miles,
mm-hmm.
and at the time, piano was my instrument, and I thought maybe I'm meant to be a pianist, a jazz pianist. But there was this nagging little voice in the back of my head that kept saying, "No, you're not a piano player. No, you're not a piano player." And I kept asking myself, well, what am I then if I'm not a piano player? And it took 6 years before I got the answer of asking that question relentlessly, over and over and over again. And one day, on a very sunny day in Salt Lake City, where I was living at the time, because I got a job accompanying dancers in the dance department there, I was walking home for lunch. It was about 12:30, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that I was a singer. So it's a 25-minute walk from class to my home. I got home. I opened up the Yellow Pages, looked for some hotels, called the first one I think that I saw. It was a Hilton hotel that had a piano bar. I called them up. The manager, who's never there, answered the phone. He said, well, come in tomorrow and audition for me. I knew 5 songs. You Are the Sunshine of My Life was one of them. I sang this one piece by a group called Blind Faith called Can't Find My Way Home. I did that a cappella. I did another piece by Joan Armatrading called Opportunity. I can't remember what the other 2 were. But anyway, based on those 5 pieces, he hired me.
Wow.
To play at his piano bar at the Hilton Hotel. It's called The Room at the Top. I had a month before my gig started, so I learned a song a day. So I learned about 30 new songs in about 30 days, plus the 5 that I auditioned, and I had my 3 sets right there. And that's how my singing career started, at a piano bar in Salt Lake City.
Unbelievable. I would never have guessed, of all places, Salt Lake City. When you come to Centennial Hall in Tucson, or you're going on a pretty long tour, do you incorporate stories about diaspora and Congo Square and the roots of the only true American art form, which is African classical music or jazz? And I'm curious about your dedication to those roots.
I tell my stories through music. I got to tell you a couple of stories that have influenced me greatly. The first one is my good friend Yo-Yo Ma went to Africa, and he went to Botswana. And originally the idea was for the 2 of us to go together, because we were talking a lot about improv and stuff like that. And I was trying to teach him what I thought it was for me at that time. And so he went to Botswana because he was very interested in, adding something to his playing, some new understanding. So unfortunately I wasn't able to go, but he sent me a video record of his experience there. And after watching this, it pretty much changed my life, my whole sense of what improvisation means to me and how important it is to music making in general. The first scene has the villagers standing around an interpreter who's trying to explain to the tribe, because Yo-Yo wasn't staying at some hotel. He wanted to be out with the people. So I'm not sure exactly where he stayed, but he wasn't in a 5-star hotel or anything like that. And so they're trying to explain to these villagers who Yo-Yo Ma is and what he's come there to do. Now, these are people who have music in their lives all the time, so they couldn't understand two things. They couldn't understand why they had to wait to hear him play, because the interpreter is telling the people that, Yo-Yo is going to play tonight at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, whatever it was. So they didn't understand why they had to wait for the music to play before they could hear it. And they also didn't understand why they had to leave where they were, go somewhere else to hear it. So that told me that music was always present. It was always in the now,
Mm-hmm.
and it was also where you were. It was not only now, it was here and now, And I thought, wow, that's really, really interesting. That's, to me, is the essence of what I do. The next story is when Yo-Yo was leaving the village, he asked to take some music back with him, and so he had the village shaman sing him one of the village songs. And the shaman sang, so Yo-Yo takes out his manuscript and he writes, and Yo-Yo says, sing it again because I want to make sure I got it right. And the shaman goes, and Yo-Yo said, well, that's not what you played before. And the shaman said, well, the first time I sang it, there was a herd of antelope in the distance, and it was a cloud passing over the sun. So, it was very, very, very different every time you improvise. That's the beauty of improvisation. Every time you do it, it's always new. It's always a new story. Those two stories alone have defined my musical life ever since I heard them. And the essence of, African-American music is the music in the moment. It's describing who you are, where you are, why you are, simultaneously all the time, over and over again. And that's been the key that, unlocks my performances.